Hey, it's Luminostic, and today I'm finally going to make a video about a subject that I've really kind of hesitated to broach. I think the reasons for that would be pretty obvious. This is definitely going to be the craziest video that I've made so far, and I'm hoping to have some benefit to some of you. So please hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget the Patreon link. It's really important. So, okay, so I just decided to tell this story today, even though, it's it's a little bit personal and it's a little bit crazy, but, basically it happened again today, and you'll come to understand what that means, as we kind of get into this a little bit. And you'll notice that the title, Ayahuasca and the Star Tribes, kind of implies a video about ayahuasca, and ayahuasca doesn't actually come into the story until, later. And I don't want to get too off subject. I think I'm probably going to make a couple of auxiliary videos that will fill in some of the parts of the story that I'm only going to kind of touch on, to import a little bit of the relevance. So watch out for those. I'll make videos about my encounter with the Star Tribe representatives, who are a group of Native American council people from the Sioux and the Mayans and the Aztec. Basically, we met in New Mexico maybe 10 years ago. And their message basically being that, there are ETs or something like that, and that the tribes all over the planet have been in contact with them forever. Some of us are in telepathic communication with them, and so this meeting came after a bunch of really strange coincidences. Actually, if you watch my synchronicity video about 11/11, that kind of is the beginning of where all this stuff sort of spiraled out from. So this particular topic, I'm just going to kind of tell a story of something that happened to me, and I think it's important, to bear in mind, that especially dealing with matters of the spirit, that you have to maintain healthy skepticism, and this is not something I failed to do. I do not believe anything dogmatically. It doesn't matter how weird a coincidence is, how improbable, it still could fundamentally just be a coincidence, and I think it's very important to remember this. People get themselves in a lot of trouble spiritually because, they think they're channeling, because they're confusing thoughts in their head with actual channeling, and I'm pretty sure that channeling actually does happen. In fact, that's a big part of the story. But I'm also, quite convinced that there's it's very easy to become deluded once you know these things are possible. Perhaps you experience a little bit of it yourself, but then you start confusing your thoughts with actual channeling. And in the mystery school tradition, which, I come from, we have training, and you develop skills to protect against that kind of delusion, so that when you're actually receiving legitimate information, anyways, we don't want to get too far. We'll make another video on all of that. But in this particular case, over the years, I had developed this interest, I guess, in a subject that kind of confused even me, which was like the Lucifer mythology and that whole archetype. And I definitely was not interested in evil or darkness or anything, and I had this strange intuitive feeling that there was something about this story that was powerful, and I didn't understand, and I needed to pay more attention to it. And it was something that had kind of in and out of my life, kind of weaving like an invisible thread of some weird devilish tapestry. And I do remember that around this period I discovered that Lucifer actually meant light bearer, and that there was some kind of relationship with this idea of Prometheus, that some being had been punished for bringing divine information to the human race. And so I definitely identified with that, because I had been accused of that sort of thing by everyone close to me over the years. But then things started to get a little strange. I tried not to make this this obsession of mine too obvious. Eventually I did play into it a lot, but people close to me would say strange things every once in a while, and I definitely had an association in people's minds with, just sort of strange coincidences would happen, and people would comment, when you're around, this stuff seems to happen a lot more. And so over the years, I'd kind of, put the Lucifer thing, since I was a little kid, kind of out of my mind, and it started to kind of crop back up. And I didn't really connect that with this other event, which was this. After the meeting with the Star Tribe, when they had told us that, some of us were in communication with these star beings, I had started to have this intermittent vision of this purple white, sort of like an ibex with really long horns, and very beautiful, but I had no context for it. It would just like appear in my mind's eye, and I was like, wow, that's amazing, but what is that? And you know, this happened maybe like 5 or 6 times right after the meeting with the natives, and you know, every time I did feel like it was significant, but what is this? You know, some demon-looking deer thing. It's not really like anything I can make a whole lot of sense out of. So fast forward a number of years later, and I'm a guitarist. So this all happened in the space of maybe 2 weeks. I'm practicing all the time. My girlfriend's watching, and she said, sometimes when you practice, there's like this purple demon thing that just sprouts up out of you, and it's just kind of there hovering while you're practicing. And I'm like, okay, you know, that's cool. So then I'm at the ranch, my friend's house, and my buddy, who actually has my guitar right now, we were jamming together, and he said, man, I've seen this thing like 3 times now, and I was hesitant to tell you, you know. And he actually told me this the first time in a room full of like 30 people. I was working with him, you know, so kind of awkward. But he's like, it's like this 30-foot tall purple demon is just kind of behind you all of a sudden while you're playing. And he's like, last time I saw it, man, I just thought, you know, like, I don't mind playing second fiddle to the fucking devil, you know. And I was like, well, that's weird, because that's the second time this week that and I still don't, I actually, no, that's not true. Immediately, I think, I thought the purple devil thing when the girl said it, but I still had no way to really reconcile what that would mean. It's like, okay, so what, is my spirit animal the devil and people can see it or something? You know, what is happening here? So a few days after that incident, and granted, these people, you know, bear in mind that they did not communicate. Like, you know, my buddy did not talk to my girlfriend. Definitely this other kid, I don't even know his name, man, and I feel bad about that. If he watches this video, I'm sorry. You know, he was a big supporter, and I only really know him as the guy with the tattoos on his face. I think he was Maori. And he stopped me one day. It was right after my other buddy told me that he had been seeing this, and he said, I gotta tell you something, man. And I said, what? And he's like, purple devil? And I'm like, you know, I already knew what he was going to say, you know, and this is the 3rd time in a week that I'm hearing this, you know. And of course, you know, I've had this like kind of obsession with like the Lucifer myth my entire life, and I seem to be on this mission in life to try to bring illumination to people. And I started to understand there's only 2 things in the universe: light and nothingness. Like, so basically everything is a trick of the light bearer. Like, is that what all this is about? You know, trying to like unravel and figure out what the hell does this mean and what does it have to do with me. So, so that happened, and there were, you know, kind of variations on a theme that have happened over time. Like, people tend to pick up on it, whether or not I'm explicit about it or not. And so today, what actually reminded me of this, a guy, a flamenco guitarist, very talented young man that I've seen around town, came up to me and he said, you know, you have the spirit of Lucifer. It's in you. I've seen it. It's like a storm, like, it's not negative, it's amazing. And, you know, my Spanish isn't that great, but I'm, you know, I was just like following him, and just, but after all these years of hearing this stuff, you know, and the purple demons and all that, so okay, here's where ayahuasca comes into the tale. I drank ayahuasca, I think maybe this was a year ago now. And I was walking along, and I hadn't seen the purple demon thing for like, except for maybe when my girlfriend and, you know, my buddy mentioned it, and I thought maybe that's what they're talking about. I drank in the ayahuasca, and I'm walking back to the teepee, and suddenly Pachamama says, remember this? And I'm looking at this purple demon thing, and I'm like, yeah, I remember that. And she's like, well, would you like to know what it is? I should also say at this point that nothing that Pachamama has told me has failed to be true. You know, and something like this is like, we're getting into kind of weird territory here, and like I said, you know, skepticism is important and all, but Pachamama hasn't lied to me yet. And she said, that's you. And I was like, what? And she said, well, you know how physicists say that 2 objects can be in the same place at the same time? I said, well, yeah, I guess. I don't think anybody can really wrap their heads around that exactly. And she's like, but you get the concept, and so that's you. One part of you is this thing in a gaseous form on a gas giant between Sirius A and Sirius B. It did not become a red dwarf star because of the influence of the other 2 stars. You exist there as these gaseous invertebrate, sort of like nearly omniscient beings that transmit these teachings even to the members of the plant kingdom and the mineral kingdom, whatever. Like, she's like, you used to teach me, so when you showed up here, I was like, what are you doing here, you know? And I thought, well, wow, that's I'm gonna really have to think about that. But I decided to go into the teepee and like tell everyone what had happened, just in case. So here's where the story gets really weird. It occurred to me a few days after the ceremony that I should check and see if there was any way to validate any of this information that was given to me by Pachamama. So I googled gas giant Sirius A, Sirius B, something along those lines, and it said that, you know, they're thinking that there is a gas giant, and the influence of the two stars is what kept it exactly what Pachamama had told me. Like, all the details were exactly what, well, the one thing that wasn't there that she told me is that it was the influence of the two stars that creates an energetic homeostasis that allowed these beings to exist for such long periods of time. You know, and I remember when I was in a teepee, I actually started talking to the people in the room as if I was on that planet and one of those beings. Like, I'm like, you guys talk about the weather, we don't really even have a concept for that. For us, it would be almost like the acidity was higher or something. Like we just don't even, not acidity, but, you know, like, it's just, there's just not even, you know, like, we have a concept of like wind, sort of, but it's more like a energetic thing that, you know, like, we don't even, it's like, what would you ask an alien, I think was the was the topic at the time, you know. And I was trying to like answer these questions to the best of my ability, and anyways, that's a whole nother video maybe. But so I realized also that this this article was only published 5 days before, and it had been 10 days since the ceremony. So it's not like I even could have plucked this information from the collective mind, because apparently it was not even there yet. So it was just a wild thing, you know, that I was told this. Oh, and then I checked in to see if there were occult correspondences, because she told me that these beings transmitted this knowledge, and I looked up Anne Bailey, who was Blavatsky. Blavatsky was an occultist princess, like, spoke an ungodly number of languages, absolute genius occult lady. She wrote The Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled, really, really interesting Luciferian books. But one of Blavatsky's students talked about how there were these beings near Sirius B that would transmit these secret teachings to humans, minerals, exactly what Pachamama had told me. I'm like looking at this, and the Blue Star and the Masonic lodges and stuff is all based on Sirius, and apparently because of this idea of these occult teachers transmitting this hidden knowledge. And so I guess I'm going to kind of wrap this up there. It's definitely going to be a to be continued kind of thing, but there's a couple of important things to take away from this, I guess. That even though, you know, I've been shown some pretty strange things with some pretty, you know, consistent, like, a lot of people would buy into this at this point, I'm still maintaining some degree of skepticism. You know, that's important. But I think that, you know, also one of the big lessons for me is that I really do believe that we have been intentionally programmed to believe that a lot of names and references that ultimately are there to do good things for us and empower us have been demonized, so that we won't even look there. We won't even consider the tools, like, you know, the mystery schools. I think, of course, there are a lot of paths. You know, Buddhism. There's all sorts of even, you know, Christianity. There's nuggets of good stuff in there. But in my experience, the most effective path to illumination and empowerment is to be found in the mystery schools. And part of the reason is that it is a conglomeration of all the best parts of all these different systems. They're not afraid to take from everything and blend it together and figure out what's useful and leave all the rest, to leave all the dogma, you know. So that's basically, you know, where the story is at this point too. You know, like, I haven't really drawn on it, except that, you know, throughout my life it is true that people have, you know, associated me. They've told me over and over again on different continents, this thing with this guy telling me that I had the spirit of Lucifer. This happens to me all the time. Anyone that's close to me can tell you that whether I am blatant about it or not, people pick up on it. And try to imagine, put yourself in my shoes, a little bit of empathy, like try not to go crazy when this is like the constant feedback. And then it's like, this is the kind of thing that you want to ignore for your own, like, you know, mental health. But eventually it just got to the point where it was like, this is not going to go away no matter what I do. Something that I emulate, people make this association on their own. So I have to kind of translate it so that they put it in the proper context. Also, you know, just in case this guy, I know he speaks some English, if he happens to watch this video, thank you very much, because having you tell me, I've seen this thing in you, but it's not negative. It's very important for me, because when I try to tell this story and the people see the association, they get the wrong ideas, and you know, I don't understand it any better than anybody else to a certain extent. You know, all I know is that the work that I'm doing here is basically positive, and I'm not saying that there's any objective truth to any of the things that, you know, any of the stories or whatever, but this is what happened from my point of view. And so thanks for watching. We will continue the story later. Hit the like button. Please donate on Patreon.